Okay, so let's see what we did yesterday. So we did pay base yesterday. What we're saying? We did pay yesterday. Okay. So yesterday we learned. Yesterday we were learning about the double nether. If half of the nether is in nefesh and half isn't, so we had a machlokes between Shmuel, who says your afara automatically goes on everything, and Rabbi Yochanan, who said my afara only goes on the part of inu nefesh. And the Ram explained that the actual point of contention was when it says Isha Yeferenu, which means he has to be made for the whole thing. It's an all or nothing event. What does that mean, all or nothing? Does that mean the entire nether, as Shmuel holds? Or does that mean the entire nether that you're able to be made for? The measurable part of the nether. And therefore, the part of the nether that you cannot be made for, because it's not inu nefesh, because the bread, that second kikor wasn't high quality bread, that you won't be able to be made for. That got us into a discussion of chasi naziris. We came out, there's no such thing as a half naziris, and there's no such thing as a half carbon or a carbon on the half of the naziris. You only bring a carbon if the naziris is completed. The only exception to that is if a woman became a nazir, a nazirah, and her husband, and she became tamei, and after she became tamei, her husband was made for it, she still brings the chatas oif. And we said, why does she bring the chatas oif? Because the chatas oif is a carbon that you even bring on a suffix. If there was a suffix yeleda, she would still bring a chatas oif. That's why you bring it by. That's why you bring it by a woman who's a nazira who became tamei and her husband was made for it. And Duvi asked, I don't see the connection, right? That was your kasha yesterday. And we don't have a terrace, but that's a very good kasha that's asked on the subject. The Gemara then went back to the question of, could someone be made for only the part of the nether that has inu nefesh? The Gemara asked once again from Nazir. I think Mati asked yesterday, why didn't the Gemara answer the same question that a nazir is lechatzoyin? So the Ran answered it either by saying that you find sometimes in naziris the tum is not necessarily connected to the Isriyayin because there was Nazir Shimshin, which didn't have an Isra to be Matama, right? And then we also, the second shot of the round is the Gemara wanted to bring out a new halacha, and that was that it's called Inu Nefesh not to go to a Levaya. You want to go to a Levaya. Why? Because if you go to a Levaya, then some people will come to your Levaya, although not the same people whose Levaya you attended. Gavaltic. Then we had the Shaila of a woman who said, I'm not going to have a no from anybody. And the Gemara said, the Mishnah says that he could be made for, and then the Mishnah adds as a second clause, she could still get leket shikha and payah. When the Gemara had three ways to explain the Mishnah. The first way to explain the Mishnah was Rava's pshat. Was Ula's pshat, that when she answers herself on everybody, she does not include her father. Her husband. Her husband does not include Cholabriyos, which means she's never also banat to her husband. Her husband can still give her hana. However, and therefore it cannot be made for. But as an aside, the Mishnah also gives us an additional piece of information that she could have enough from everybody else with lekachikopaya, because we're soon going to see that's not called having direct enough from them, because they're just being mafker, and the oni is taking it from hefker. So it wasn't really, it's not really exactly how I'm saying it, that it's an aside. What it's saying is, first, there's two reasons why if a woman says that she's not having enough of any of the brias that her husband can be made for. Two reasons. A is because her husband could still support her, and B is even if her husband couldn't support her, she still could find another way to support herself through leket shikha and payah. That was how Ula understood it. Rava understood the Mishnah a little bit differently. Rava understood, in fact, that her husband is considered as part of the brios, and in fact, if she says, I'm not going to have enough from anybody, she may not have enough from her husband either. Oy bazoi, why isn't it called inu nefesh? Why can't you be made for? There it is, because she has another way to survive. She can survive on leket shikha and payah. We had yesterday, or we had 2 days ago, that Shmuel said that even if she only answers herself from a no of one person, that's called inu nefesh. and the husband could be mefer. So the Iran answered yesterday, that's Shmuel according to the Rabbanan. But our Mishnah, our Perik, as Rav Huna told us, is following Rabbi Yosy, who has a much higher bar, much higher threshold before something is called the Inu Nefesh. And then there was the Rab Nachman Shita, which is the one that garnered the most attention in the Ran, and that was Lo'elam Baal Lav B'chlal Briyosu. When she's married to him, in fact, she will not be usher. And he can have enough of her, and she can have enough of him. The chiddush here is if it was Nizgarsha, once he gives her a divorce, there she will no longer have enough of him. So Rav Nachman says a huge chiddush that at the time of the nether, she's married to this man. She's allowed to have enough of him. She's not part of the briyos. However, if he divorces her, she will then become usher to have enough from him. Nevertheless, she could still get lechet, shikha, and payah. And that triggered a very big discussion in the Ran. Because the Ran quotes a Ramban that seems to say that this machlokes will be totally in a Gemara later on and a Yerushalmi. And that is as follows. If someone made a nether, miyar de hayam, la'achish loishim. So someone said, I'm making a nether that I'm not going to have enough from anybody who works in the sea, but I don't want my nether to be chal until 30 days from today. So right now, we're in limbo. The amira, the expression, the articulation of the nether was today, but I don't want the nether to become active for another 30 days. The yeshkan adam shebeshas nidroi hu miyar de hayam. There was somebody that at the time the person said the words, I want to ask myself, I'm having enough miyar de hayam. At that moment, Reuven, for instance, was a yar de hayam. But ula'acher mikain kodim shloishim yoim nasa miyosh v'yabosh. But this Reuven, although when I uttered the iser that I don't want to have enough from anybody who's yar de hayam, at that time he was a yar de hayam. But I said my neder won't be chal for 30 days, and by the time 30 days rolled around, he was no longer a yar de hayam. So there's a machlokes in this case between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva says you go basar the time that he said the neder. At the time that he said the neder, Reuben was yar de hayam. Therefore, in 30 days, Reuben will be usher to have enough. I'm sorry, the neder will be usher to have enough from Reuben. Rabbi Shmuel then said, no, you don't look at the situation when he uttered the neder. You look at the situation of when he wanted the neder to be chal. The neder is only going to be chal in 30 days. In 30 days, Reuven is not yar de hayam. He's yosh v'yabasha. Therefore, there's no isser on him. The Ramban says, and he brings a Yosy similar to it, that our shaila will be totally in this shaila. If you hold, like Rabbi Kiva, that everything depends on the Shas HaNeder, well, then over here too, his husband, the Shas HaNeder, does not become Maaser. But if you hold, you go Maaser the Chalois of the Neder, you go Maaser the future, then this husband will be Maaser if there's a divorce. That's how the Rabban wants to set it up. Your mom is hitting home run after home run. That's the Ramban's opinion that's going to argue on the Ramban. So that's a very good point. So let's hold that for a second. I just want to develop a little bit better the Ramban, who says it's totally in this machlokes. The reason why there's a problem with this machlokes is because the Yerushalmi paskins like Rabbi Kiva. So the Yerushalmi paskins Rabbi Kiva, and that will not be consistent with Rab Nachman. The other problem is from high Pirusha, the fourth line up in the skinny lines. From high Pirusha, the Perishinon, also high Yerushalmi kigamar dilon. The Yerushalmi, which seems to pass like Rabbi Kiva, will be inconsistent with our Gemara of Nachman. The Hacham Askinan over here, the Gemara comes to the conclusion. Even though at the time when she made the neder, the husband wasn't included in the neder, and the husband is mutter, she's allowed to have enough from her husband. When she becomes divorced, so Reb Nachman, she will become also to have enough from him. Because now he's part of her category of briyos, which he's not allowed to have enough from. Alma la basar amira bilchud azlina. You don't just follow the situation at the time of her expression of her nether. It changes. If things change, if the situation changes, it will change, which is not consistent with the Yerushalmi. The Chitemer of Nachman Mukile Lemasnizin Rabbi Shmuel. You might want to learn that Rabbi Nachman will say that our Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Shmuel, even though the Yerushalmi passes like Rabbi Kiva. Maybe Rabbi Nachman is understanding our Mishnah like Rabbi Shmuel. The Azo Basar Shah Shaneder Chalva, that you don't only look at the time where the nether was stated, rather you look at the time later when the nether was chal. That's why Reb Nachman says that once she becomes nisgasha, then she's also leihanut b'mayla. So the Ram doesn't like this pshat. The Sosam Lontana by Pirkei Rebbe Kiva. The problem is, if you look at the Tanoim, if you look at the Mishnais, later on you'll see that our Tanoim seem to hold like Rebbe Kiva. Because a woman who said, I read in Nazir la'achad la'mejoin, if a woman said, I will become a Nazir after 30 days, so she was single, and she says, I'm going to become a Nazir, I want to start my Nazirs in 30 days, even though she got married in between, so she already had a husband before the nether was going to be chal, in Yachal. We don't allow him to be mefer, we consider that pre-existing nether. So you see clearly that you go basar the shasamira. So because of that, we're forced to say that this Reb Nachman over here, who's learning in our Mishnah over here, that once she becomes Niskareshes, her situation changes, that has to fit in with Rebbe Kiva. And the problem is, the way the Ramban learns it, this Mishnah, our Mishnah, how could you possibly explain it according to Rebbe Kiva? Now our Gemara is going to be a contradiction with the Yerushalmi. And for the Ran, exactly what Dubi said. This is not a shaila of lomdus when the nether is chal. This here in our sugi is a shaila what the nether is. What did she mean? Which is exactly, I think, what Dubi's trying to say, right? Venerally, the lekala mismach baha a Gemara the b'nei ma'rava. Unfortunately, we cannot rely on the Yerushalmi to say that we go basar the later situation. Keep the Gemara dilon pligala, because our Gemara argues. The Lefun Gemara, according to our Gemara, Aser bein b'bnei adam shahayu b'chlal l'shoynoi b'shas haneder, bein b'bnei adam shahayu b'chlal l'shoynoi la'achem ekei. Anyway, this shouldn't be connected to that sugya, because here the Isser applies both based on the situation when she uttered another, but it also changes if the situation changes. That's not really the shaila of Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel there. B'savrei Rabbi Kiva lakash al milta klal. And really, this whole shaila of Rabbi Kiva has nothing to do with the question here that Rabbi Nachman raises. Why? Exactly what Dubi said. Because this shaila here is a shaila of what does she mean when she says brios. The Gemara Dilan Savrin, our sugya argues on the Yerushalmi, and our sugya holds the bechalal lashon b'nei adam koilu bechalal, kulu bechalal. In the lashon of b'nei adam, everything's included. Everything that now she means to answer upon herself, whatever is now called brios, and whatever in the future will be brios. Rabbi Kiva is talking about something else. Rabbi Kiva b'mosei basar drasha the kroy daik lehachi. He's just learning a separate halacha that's not this halacha that you learn from Sukkim. That's not a question of what she meant. To l'shayich hasam lashon b'nei adam klal. There, the question of lashon b'nei adam does not pass. Uv'yishalmi loy sabri hachi. The Yerushalmi holds that when someone says, I'm being noidim yord hayam, vadai lahani the have yord hayam b'shas ikar nidre kamacham. Zokt around the primary machlokes between our Gemara and the Gemara in the Yerushalmi is not about Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel. It's what is the das of a person. Our Gemara, according to Rabbi Nachman, holds that when she makes a nether, she's making the nether based on whatever briosh is. So her nether is going to fluctuate. It's what briosh is now, and if things change, then things change, and she wants that incorporated in the nether. So right now, her husband is not b'chala briosh, and if she's divorced, her ex-husband will be b'chala briosh. That's what our Gemara holds. The Yerushalmi holds no. When she makes a nether, she's only thinking of what the status of the nether is, b'shas when she made the nether. Now the question is, when did she make the nether? There you have a machlokes of Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel. When you make the nether, is it making the nether speaking it out, or is it making the nether when the nether is chal? But the whole shaila between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel was only negeya if her kavanah was, I want the issue to take hold based on the time that I made this nether. And then you could have a machlokes. What's called making the nether? Is it uttering it, or is it the chalosh of the nether? But our sugya has nothing to do with that, because our sugya holds her das when she makes a nether is to include any changes that'll occur. Will be so things can become reclassified. So now briosh could mean A, and in 10 years briosh could mean B, and that's exactly what she meant in her nether, and that's completely independent of what the machlokes between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel is. The machlokes Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel is, when do we consider the nether as happening? When she speaks it out, or when the nether is chal? And therefore, our sugya and the Yerushalmi argue. They argue about the kavanah of a person when they make a nether. Do they have in mind any changes in status, or do they want the nether to be chal as per the status at the time of the nether? And then you're subject to a machlokes of what is the time of the nether. But according to the argument, it's not relevant to the time of the nether, because the nether anyway adapts, it changes. And then the Ran tries to massage that maybe that's what the Ramban meant as well. Okay, Gavalti. Now we're up to analyzing these shittas. So Rav Nachman was the one who said that her nether will be dynamic, and it'll change based on the status of her husband at the time. He could start off being not bina briois, and therefore the nether would not include him. But if there's a divorce, he would now be considered briois, and she would become also. So Esei Rav al Rav Nachman, who Baal lav b'chal brioisu. Are you going to tell me, Rav Nachman, that the Baal is not included in the nether when she says briois? But now I'm assuming this kasha will be just as shver on Ula, because Ula also said that the Baal is not b'chal briois, and she's not asking her husband. But now we learn, what if a woman says netula ani min haYehudim, and that's a lashon of saying I'm not going to have tashmish with any man. I'm totally removed from having tashmish with any man. What about her husband? Yofer chelkai. He could be made for his chelik, meaning he's allowed to be made for her nether related to having relations with him. And therefore they'll be able to have relations. But she won't be able to have relations with anybody else. Now, of course, she's an Eishish, but even if he divorced her, she would be usher to have relations with anybody else. Frek to Rava, the Amrit Baal lav b'chal brioisu, if you're going to say that a Baal is not called b'chal briois, meaning when she said netula ani min haYehudim, she never even meant to answer her husband. So if that's the case, I'm not going to read, based on the way I'm reading it, this is not the nusach of the Gemara. I'm going to change the words of the Gemara. The Amrit Baal lav b'chal brioisu, if you're going to say that when she's answering herself min haYehudim, she does not mean to answer herself from the husband, then hafara lamali. Why do you need any type of hafara at all? She never included him in the nether. He was never us. That's one shot in the Gemara. Zok the Gemara, shiny hacha the mucha milsa dalateir kol. Normally, you will say that she doesn't include her husband in this. Like in the case of our last Mishnah, if she's answering herself on her Naf Malder Briosh, she didn't include her husband because she's answering everybody else. But when she's answering herself in Tashmish, she can't possibly be referring to everybody else because she already is answering everybody else. So here she must have meant to answer herself from Tashmish even on her husband. And that's why, B'dafka in this case, do we say it needs a Hafara? Because it's clear that she must be referring to her husband because she cannot possibly be referring to anybody else. That was one pshat. The other pshat of the Gemara is similar but not the same. So I'm going to go back and read the Gemara again. The Amrit Baal B'chal Briyasu, then Nidre Inu Nefeshein V'Yafarla. If you're going to say that she doesn't include her Baal, so it doesn't make sense her nether over here. So Al Karchach, her nether cannot be a nether about Tashmish. Al Karchach, her nether must be about regular Hana, which would be the exact same case as our Mishnah. And if that's the case, the Amrit Baal B'chal Briyasu, and she's asking herself on everybody, so the Nidre Inu Nefeshein V'Yafarla. Then he should be able to be made for the nether on everybody else as well. So that it's going on Bia. Shiny Hacha, the Muchamilsa, the Later Kashanafsha, she's answering herself on him. Okay, let's see the Ran inside, because the Ran explains these two Nischayos. That she's really answering herself on Bia. And of course, since she can't be answering herself on everybody else, because she already is answering everybody else, she must have meant to ask herself on him. The teretz is the same. The question is what the kasha is. So let's see the round. So that was the first nusach that the kasha was. If she's not answering herself on her husband at all, why is hafara relevant? So the ground, the muchamilsa, the atayar kasha option. Normally, she's not b'chal briyos, as Rav Nachman said. Would she answer herself from having tashmish? By Maaser, since she proclaimed the Tula and Lim and Yehudim, al karchach daitahu she baal b'chal isura. She must be referring to answering herself from having enough from her husband. The hatera kasher nafsha, because she'll only ask herself on something that up until her nether was mutter. The be'isura, if she's referring to everybody else, lama lala Maaser, why would she ask herself kfar asua by medich? She's already asked her to have relations with anybody else because she's an Ishjish. Even the less law, Hitera, Elabetashmish Baila, since the only person that she can have Tashmish with before her nether, Al Karchach is her husband, then Al Karchach Ikar Nidra, who lesser and Nostash Mishai. So her nether must be to answer herself from having Tashmish with her husband. Hilcha Chacha is different than in our Mishnah. Vadai Al Karchach Baal B'chal Briyos. Here Al Karchach, the Baal is B'chal Briyos, because otherwise, what is she answering? She's only going to be answering something that up until now was mutter to her. I guess when a woman makes a nether, she's probably not thinking so far ahead. In general, someone who makes a nether is not thinking too far ahead. Okay, that was the first nusach. The second nusach was the amrit ba'ala b'chal briyasu nidra in nefeshu leifrla la'olam. So zokt around based on the Yosy of our Gemara as we read it, if you're going to say she's answering herself, then you could say she's referring to Tashmish. She meant to answer herself from Tashmish on her husband. Then you could explain you could explain it as Tashmish. She was answering herself from having Tashmish with her husband. She wanted to make them all also. And therefore, she could be made for his Yofer Chelkai Bilvad. He could be made for his Chelak. And if she gets divorced, it will be also for that relationship with anybody. If you're going to say the Baal Lav B'chal Briyasu, she does not include her husband. She's not referring to her husband. Well, then what is she saying? You can't say that her nether is referring to Tashmish. Regardless, she cannot have relations with anybody else. She must be saying, I'm not going to have pairs with them. And then if that's the case, if she's saying, I'm not going to have pairs from anybody in the world, well, then that's already Nidra Inu Nefesh. The Gemara answered, no, it's not referring to Paris, it's referring to Tashmish, and it's referring to his Tashmish, and that's why he has to be made for it. Okay, about it.
came out the wrong way. The marriage is so good. I can't imagine the way it was received. I'm just thinking, maybe this is a nice way situation.
I can't even say anything. Anything you say gets you into trouble.
No, I was just saying, maybe this is a way of her God forbid, something happens.
I hear.
I don't want to, I'm not going to.
I hear. That's like the golf club story. Everyone knows the golf club story. The golf club story is a man who was in his 30s, and he asked his wife. His wife asked him, "Yankel, Barry, whatever his name was, if something happened to me, would you remarry?" So he tells her, "Look, are you trying to pick a fight? Like, why do we have to talk about this for?" So she says, "I'm just asking a question." I said, "What's the big deal? Come on, I don't want to talk about this." She said, "Yeah, I would remarry. I'm young. I'm 35 years old. Why would I remarry? Like, what do you want from me? Like, well, where is this going?" She says, "Would you live with your new wife in our house?" So you know the story already.
No, I don't.
So she says, "Like, I don't know, like, I don't like where this conversation is going. I'm not talking about this." She said, "No, I want you to tell me." So he says, "Well, what should I do? I should tell the house I'm buying a new house and pay land transfer tax twice just because, like, yeah, I would live in our house. What's wrong with our house? Said, would you use our bedroom?" Look, I don't know what you're asking me these crazy questions for. But I should move the furniture around and move out of the master bedroom. Look, would you use our beds? She's not. She's like, I don't know. Like, why are we talking about this? Would you use our linen? Would you let her use my clothing? He's like, "What do you want? You spend thousands and thousands of dollars in the most expensive stores on these clothing. You want me to throw it all out? Like, I don't know what you want." So then she asked him, "Would you let her use my golf clubs?" He said, "No." So she said, "I don't understand. You let her use my house, my bedroom, my bed, my clothing, but not my golf clubs." So he says, "I can't let her use your golf clubs because she's left-handed." So the hell Gemara Vayter. She can have leket, shikha, and peya, and therefore, she has a way. It's not in your nefesh. She has a way to survive. Frek the Gemara, lekatani, maaser. Why doesn't the Mishnah add to the list that you can also get maaser ani? Well, Tanya b'braisa uva maaser ani. In fact, we have another braisa that talks about the same halacha that our Mishnah discusses, and in that braisa, the braisa says that she has another option. She has maaser ani as well. So why is it that our Mishnah omitted maaser ani? Now, what is maaser ani? Maaser ani is every year a person has to separate maaser rishon, which goes to the Levi, and maaser sheni, which he himself can eat, but he has to eat it in Yerushalayim. Every third year, instead of maaser sheni, the Baal Habayis separates maaser ani, and instead of eating it himself in Yerushalayim, he just gives it to an ani. So that's also something that only goes to Aniyim. So why isn't that also a way where she could sustain herself, which would make it not an idra in nefesh? In fact, there's a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanon as to whether or not maaser ani is just like hefker. By leket shikha and peya, I'm not getting anything from the Balabayas who left the leket shikha and peya. It's just hefker, and I get it from hefker. Maaser ani is like truma. I can pick which card I want to give it to. I can pick which ani I want to give it to, and therefore she wouldn't be able to accept maaser ani from somebody because that would be considered having ana from that somebody. And that's what the Gemara wants to say. This shaila hinges in as to whether or not maaser ani is it toivas hana l'bailim. Can the bailim decide which ani to give it to, or is it like leket shikha and peya where the bailim have no say into which ani gets it? It's not we learn. Rabbi Eliezer says, "Ein adam tzarich likrei shem al maaser ani shel demai." The halacha is if there is demai is produce that we're not sure as to whether or not the bailim were mafresh trumas and maaseris. So the halacha is you have to be mafresh truma because otherwise it's tevel, and then you'll be eating iser. You have to be mafresh truma, and you have to be mafresh trumas maaser, and you have to be mafresh maaser rishon. But maaser rishon doesn't have kedusha to it, so that you can hold on to, and you also have to be mafresh maaser ani. But Rabbi Eliezer says you don't have to be mafresh maaser ani. Ein adam tzarich likra shem al maaser ani shel demai. You don't have to identify that this here is maaser ani. The chachamim maimim kairei shem vein tzarich lahafish. The chachamim say no, you have to separate it and announce this is Maaser Ani. You don't have to actually separate it out of your out of the pile, but you're gonna have to say this amount, 10% at the side over here, is going to be Maaser Ani. You don't have to actually physically take it out, but that's good enough because once you make that fresher, it's no longer tevel. Now, the Ran tells us that this question isn't only a question by Demai. Why wouldn't I have to be mafresh by Demai? Because I don't ever have to be mafresh Maaser Ani. Is there a chiyuv to be mafresh Maaser Ani, and if not, the whole pile is tevel? The Chachamim holds, yes, I must be mafresh the Maaser Ani, otherwise the whole pile is tevel. I don't have to give it to the Ani, I can hold on to it. But Rebbe Eliezer holds, I don't even have to be mafresh it because the fact that Maaser Ani is due from this pile will not make it into tevel. So the Gemara wants to develop this for my love. Let's suggest the man the Amar Sveikoi Toivel, the man the Amar who holds that you actually have to be mafresh it like the Chachamim. Kasover he holds is leitoivas. If you have to be mafresh it, by definition that says you get to pick who it goes to. What's the connection? We're going to see soon. But there's a connection. If you have to be mafresh it to take off the status of tevel from your pile of tfuah, then you have a right, by definition, as to who it goes to. The chivin is leitoivas. Since the Bailam has a right to pick which Ani it goes to, therefore, loy mahanya. Therefore, you can't give it to her, because if he gives it to her, there would be a problem of her violating the Isser Anah, and therefore, she can't rely on that to survive. And according to Rebbe Eliezer, who holds you don't have to be mafresh, because he holds that even if you don't separate the Maaser Ani, the pile of two that you have is not tevel. The chol shesveika any tevel less le teves anah. Since we say that you don't have to be mafresh the Maaser Ani, therefore I don't have a right to pick which Ani it goes to. Therefore, it's like any other hefker, like leka tzika and peya b'shari leilas haniyah. So the Gemara wants to say that our Mishnah that doesn't list off Maaser Ani as one of the things that she could survive with must hold that I have to be mafresh to Maaser Ani, and therefore I get to pick who it goes to, which by definition says I'm not allowed to give it to her because now she's having enough from it. But the price that includes Maaser Ani must hold like Rebbe Eliezer holds you don't have to be mafresh Maaser Ani at all. Therefore, it's like regular hefker, and she would be able to avail herself of that. Okay, let's see the Heilig Aran on this. Kasavar Sveika Edutable. Who adin levade? First of all, the Ran says right off the bat, this is not a question related to Demai. This is a general question. Does the Maaser Ani have to be separated from the pile in order to take off the status of tevel? Since we're talking about Demai, so that's why we're using the word suffix. But the same question that we're discussing here applies to regular tfuah of tevel. Does it remain tevel if you were not yet mafresh Maaser Ani? The chivin desveika any tevel kasaver less by teves anah. Zokteran, there's a connection. If it doesn't become tevel without the physical separation, therefore I don't have a right to pick who it goes to. What's the connection? Zokteran, the teves anah the tevel v'ya tevel tali. Whether or not I pick who it goes to is actually directly linked to whether or not you have to physically be mafresh. The Ran tells us how you know that. It says in the pasuk, a person shouldn't be mechal kachim bnei Yisrael asher yarimu. This is in the parsha of Trumas and Maasros. So if the pasuk shot of the pasuk is that you shouldn't eat Trumas and Maasros, but we darshan the pasuk as referring to tevel. Don't be mechal kachim bnei Yisrael, that they will eventually be mafresh. So it's pre-afrosha. If we're talking pre-afrosha, we're talking about tevel. The Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us that the pasuk of is not the pasuk shot. Rather, it's referring to tevel. It's referring to the Isser by Yisrael to tevel. since the word that uses lo yichalu, mash with a toivel. If there's a chilul here, it must be that it's tevel. Meaning, before you make the harama, before you make the afrasha, the item will be tevel. The hani the tivli, now that we've established that this pasuk is talking about tevel because it uses the word v'lo yichalu, we could look at the next line of the pasuk as asher yorimu. Tala haramasam bebailim. It says asher yorimu, means somebody has to physically make a hafrasha. Since somebody has to physically make a hafrasha, it tells you shetayva sanah shalahem. How do you see that the tayva sanah shalahem from asher yorimu? Zaktiran dechsiv as asher yorimu uchaman dechsiva behu nesinadam. If it says asher yorimu, you have to separate the truma or the Maaser, whatever this is referring to. You have to separate something from this pile in order to make an ois tevel. Yorimu means separate for the purposes of giving it to the Ani, for the purposes of giving it to the Kohen, for the purposes of giving it to the Levi. So we learned that by definition, Yorimu means to give. So from here you see, Hilchach Davka b'detabli Ika Taiva Shanala Bailim. You see from this pasuk that Lo Yechalu, something that if you don't separate it, it remains tevel. Something like that, the Baal has to separate and give. The fact that he has to separate and give, it shows that he controls who gets it. He doesn't separate and abandon. He has to separate and give. Separate and give means he's selecting who he's going to give it to. So that's where you learn that anything that's toivel, by definition, anything that's toivel, if you don't separate it, by definition, you have toivel shanah, you have the right to control who it goes to. So that's how we know this halacha. Now we need to know, how do you know, what's the shaila of whether or not Maaser Ani is toivel or not? But we have a machlokes Rabbi on the Rabbanan. If you don't separate Maaser Ani, is the kri tevel or not? Where did that machlokes come from? Well, Maaser Ani, Laman is like Sveika any tevel, less by tevel shana. Hilchach, therefore, Yechayel lehenis b'Maaser Ani. If you hold that he doesn't have to separate it, there's no tevel shana. Therefore, that's also something that this woman who said, I won't have enough of anybody, she can avail herself of Maaser Ani as well. Tefker ba'almahu. Umanda makayr shame, but our Mishnah holds that in fact, it is toivel if you don't separate Maaser Ani, and therefore there's toivel shana there, and therefore she wouldn't be able to take it. Because the mishumach tzorach likra shem. Because svekei toivel is ba toivel shana. Since he has to be mafresh it, now he has the right to give it to whoever wants. The isay bechlav leichal kachay b'nei Yisrael. Hilchach, therefore, given the isbeana, aser lisanuye, the medidei misani v'lei mafkera. It's beautiful. That's the machlokes. If you hold that you have to be mafresh to Maaser Ani, otherwise it's tevel, then she couldn't avail herself of Maaser Ani because she's getting it from the Nisan. But if no afresh is required, then it's like regular heifer. Kach pisher boisa. However, v'lei pirshu plukta the toivel by the toivel my toya. Now we need to get down to the root of the question. What is this machlokes about? Whether or not, if you're not mafresh Maaser Ani, if it's tevel or not. For easy mishanichak the parish harbe, with any nira to my disvirle any toivel hanu taima, mishum disvirle I after sheyeh akri atzmai chomer mipnei Maaser Ani hamur boy Yosy Maaser Ani atzmai. Maaser Ani anybody can eat, right? If anybody can eat Maaser Ani, so how could it be that if you're not mafresh Maaser Ani, it makes it isser? Truma, I understand. Truma is isser. Before you mafresh it, the whole pile is usher. But Maaser Ani, there's no isser in it. There's no kedusha in it. So therefore, how could it be that if you didn't separate it, it would be an isser? That's the base understanding. That's the logic. However, uman desvirle toivel. So because of this logic, why would somebody hold that when you were not mafresh to Maaser Ani, in fact is tevel? It's because we learn it out of a pasuk, and the Gemara learns it out of a pasuk in Yevamos. The Gemara says, "Yochel lo yehei chayiv el al tevel shaloi hura mimeni kolikar." I would have thought that there's no chi of tevel only if nothing was separated from it. Not truma, not Maaser, not Maaser Ani, not Maaser Sheni, nothing. But what if it was hura mimeni truma gedola? But what if truma gedola has already been separated? V'loi hura mimenu Maaser Rishon, or Maaser Rishon was separated from it. V'loi Maaser Sheni, v'afilu Maaser Ani minayin. How do you know? Even if only Maaser Ani was the only thing that wasn't separated from the pile, how do you know that it still remains tevel? Talmud loymar loisucha lechol b'sharecha. So I'm going to look at the psukim in the Torah Orach Shalom, and the pasuk says in Devarim Yud Beis Yudzayin, loisucha lechol b'sharecha. You're not allowed to eat in your own cities. Maaser de Godcha, the Siroischa, the Yitzerecha, the Bechorish Bekarcha, the Tzanecha. That's what it says in the pasuk. And it also says in a different pasuk, it says Kisachala la'aser is called Maaser Tevuoscha, Mishnas Shlishis. It says you should give it to the Ger Yosem Avana, but Achlu B'Sharecha B'Shavei. So it's interesting. In one case where it's talking about the Trumas and Maasers, it says you can eat it B'Sharecha. And in the other pasuk we said Loisuch Alecha B'Sharecha. So what is it? Zok the Gemara, but Achlu B'Sharecha B'Shavei is referring to Maaser Ani, because that's not restricted as to where you can eat it. The Ani can eat it anywhere. So we learn as follows. See, it says you're not allowed to eat it. B'sharecha we say is referring to Maaser Ani. Why is it referring to Maaser Ani? Because when it says earlier in the pasuk, the only thing that you could eat anywhere is going to be Maaser Ani. So therefore, when it says the word of Echel b'sharecha, it's referring to Maaser Ani, yet it says you're not allowed to eat b'sharecha, all these things, which is referring to before you were mafresh. So that's how you know that you have to be mafreshed, because it says lesuchal lechol b'sharecha. Beautiful. So Amar le Abaye, Zokt Abaye, that's not the machloikis, the Mishnah and the Brisa. The machloikis is not whether or not you have to be mafresh Maaser Ani, and therefore whether or not there's Toivas Hana here, and therefore she would not be able to accept it from the person giving the Maaser Ani because there's Toivas Hana. Rather, the Chul Almo Sveikoi Toivel. Everybody would hold that, in fact, you do have to be mafresh, and everybody holds that there is a problem with Toivas Hana, and everybody holds that you wouldn't be able to accept it. Rabbi Lezer Rabbanan b'Hakamitah. But you know what the machlokes between Rabbi Lezer and the Rabbanan is? Is Rabbi Lezer savar lo nechshedu amei haaretz al Maaser Ani. So we had a machlokes over here as to whether or not from the Maya you have to be mafresh Maaser Ani. Zok Abaye, the machlokes is not about the din of whether or not Maaser Ani needs a frasha. In fact, Maaser Ani always needs a frasha. So if Maaser Ani always needs a frasha, why would you say that you don't have to be mafresh Maaser Ani from the Mai? The teretz is because Rabbi Lezer savar lo nechshedu amei haaretz al Maaser Ani. The reason why you don't have to be mafresh Maaser Ani from the Mai is because we can assume that the Amaretz separated. Why? Because he has nothing to lose. Even the ilu mafke nichsei b'hava ani v'shakalei. Therefore, v'shakalei who less lepseda. He has no problem being mafresh Maaser Ani because it doesn't cost him a penny. He'll be mafresh Maaser Ani, and then if he wants to use it, he'll say I'm mafker all my nechasim. Then he can take the Maaser Ani, and then he can be current the nechasim back. So he has such an easy loophole to get around it. He might as well separate Maaser Ani. Rabban Zavri nichsei loy mafker inish. A person is not going to even be mafker his nechasim for 5 minutes to chap the Maaser Ani because he's afraid in those 5 minutes someone's going to go and take his things. The Mir says, therefore, we can't trust a Amorit to take up Maaser Ani because he won't, because there's too much of a risk there. So now we're back to square one because everybody holds that it's toivel. So therefore, everybody should hold that this woman shouldn't be able to take Maaser Ani from anybody. So now we need an explanation. Why is it that the Bryce has said that this woman who says I'm not going to have enough from anybody, how is it that you can accept Maaser Ani from anybody? Zok the Gemara, Rav Amma Omer kan b'Maaser Ani mischalek b'sech habayis. Dichsiva bein nesina. It says v'nasata lalevi lager. Sometimes Maaser Ani is distributed by the balbayis to the people knocking at his door. Therefore, it's also for her to have enough from him because she's having enough from the balbayis who's giving the Maaser Ani to her. But sometimes the Maaser Ani isn't distributed; they're just left in the field, and anybody who wants can come and take them. Even just leave it there. Therefore, shari lay lis hanuye. Therefore, she's a lot of anor. Now, when is it done this way or when is it done that way? So there's actually different explanations in the Rishonim. One explanation in the Rishonim is that during the harvest season in the summer, that's when he gives it out. But once it's the winter season, then he just abandons everything and lets them come take. There are others who learn that in the summer he leaves it in the field, and for the winter he gathers it in because it's already messy. So there's a shiloh when all of these seasons are, but there are seasons where somebody actually gives out the Maaser Ani, there he wouldn't be able to give it to this woman. And there's seasons where a person just puts the Maaser Ani out in the field, and anybody can come along and take it, and then he would be able to. So Oibazoi, we'd have to say that our Mishnah is speaking at a time where or a place where they give it out. That's why our Mishnah couldn't lift up Maaser Ani. And the Brisa who lists up Maaser Ani is referring to a time or place where she would be able to take it, which was left out in the field. Okay, we'll stop here. I went way over.